The fog thickened around the narrow, creaky bridge, its wooden planks groaning under Liam's footsteps. The air felt damp and cold, clinging to his skin like the lingering shadows of a dream. He paused halfway across, gazing down at the murky water below, where the river's current rushed in a constant, relentless motion. The sound of the flowing water was the only thing that cut through the eerie silence. This was where he always came when his mind felt heavy, clouded by the frustrations of his stalled art career. He would walk here, alone in the fading light of dusk, hoping the cold air would clear his thoughts. But tonight, something was different. There was a presence, faint but undeniable, like a ripple in the air behind him. Liam stopped, his breath catching in his throat as he slowly turned. There, sitting on the edge of the bridge, was a boy. The child sat with his legs dangling over the side, his head bowed slightly as though lost in thought. His figure was shrouded in the fog, blending into the grayness that surrounded them both. The boy couldn't have been more than 10 years old, with dark hair that curled at the ends and a thin frame. He wore a plain, old-fashioned coat, something that looked out of place in the modern world. For a long moment, Liam just stared, unsure whether to approach or retreat. His heart began to race, the stillness of the boy unnerving him. There was no sound, no footsteps, no rustling of clothes, just the distant rushing of the river and the steady beat of his own pulse in his ears. "Hey," Liam called out, his voice low, uncertain. The boy didn't move. Taking a cautious step forward, Liam's instinct was to reach out, to ask the boy if he was lost, but something held him back. The boy slowly lifted his head, and their eyes met. There was something deeply unsettling about his gaze. Dark, knowing, as if he had seen more of the world than a child should. And then, just as suddenly as he had appeared, the boy was gone. Liam blinked, his heart hammering in his chest. He stepped forward quickly, looking around in confusion. No sound of footsteps, no sign of the boy, only the swirling fog and the empty bridge stretched before him. Had he imagined it? His mind raced, trying to make sense of what had just happened. But something in the pit of his stomach told him that what he had seen was real. He turned and hurried off the bridge, the sense of unease following him all the way back to his apartment. Liam sat in front of his easel, the pale morning light filtering through the curtains of his small studio apartment. His brushes lay untouched beside him, the blank canvas glaring back at him like an accusation. His mind felt like it was filled with fog, much like the one that had clung to the bridge the night before. He had spent the night tossing and turning, the image of the boy lingering in his thoughts, impossible to shake. There was something about that encounter, something beyond strange. It had felt as if the boy was trying to tell him something without saying a word. Unable to focus on anything else, Liam picked up a brush and began to paint. He didn't know what he was trying to create, but his hand moved on its own, guided by an impulse he couldn't control. Stroke by stroke, the boy took shape on the canvas. His thin frame, the old coat, the eyes that had locked with his in the fog, they all appeared with a clarity that startled Liam. He hadn't remembered the details of the boy's face until now, but as he painted, they came flooding back, as if he had known this face for years. The brush moved faster, guided by something deep within him, something that felt buried beneath years of forgotten memories. It was only when he stepped back to look at his work that he realized he had captured the boy exactly as he had seen him. But there was one difference. The eyes. The eyes in the painting were darker, more intense than he remembered, as if they were watching him. Liam shuddered, stepping away from the easel. "Who are you?" he muttered to himself, running a hand through his hair. The boy's face, the encounter, the strange way the fog had swallowed him. It all seemed too real, too vivid to be a mere figment of his imagination. But why did it feel like he had seen this boy before? Liam's thoughts swirled in a chaotic mess. He tried to focus on something else, anything else, but his mind kept circling back to the same question. He looked at the painting again, his gaze drawn to the boy's eyes. Then a memory surfaced, fleeting and fragmented. A memory of his own childhood, long buried. He was a child again, standing on that same bridge. And there was someone with him. Someone small, someone like the boy in the painting. The memory slipped away as quickly as it had come, leaving Liam with more questions than answers. The knock at the door startled him. Marissa, his sister. She had been avoiding him for weeks, but today, she had finally decided to visit. Liam glanced at the painting one last time, unease settling in his chest as he opened the door. That night, sleep was elusive for Liam. His thoughts spun in endless circles, pulling him back to the boy, the bridge, and the unfinished painting. When he finally drifted into a fitful sleep, his mind was pulled into a dream so vivid it felt like a memory. In the dream, Liam was a child again. His small feet padded across the worn wooden planks of the bridge, the same bridge where he had seen the boy. The air was thick with fog, and the river below whispered secrets as it flowed in its dark, steady current. He wasn't alone. A boy stood next to him, the same one from the bridge, but this time they were the same age. The boy's face was still obscured by the fog, his features blurry and undefined, but Liam felt an odd sense of familiarity. They stood side by side, gazing down at the water, as if waiting for something important. "Who are you?" Liam asked, his voice small and curious, but the boy didn't answer. Instead, he turned his head slightly, as though he could hear something Liam couldn't. A chill crept up Liam's spine. Suddenly, the boy turned and walked to the edge of the bridge. Without hesitation, he climbed onto the railing, balancing on the narrow ledge. Panic rose in Liam's chest, his heart pounding as he reached out to stop the boy, but before he could touch him, the boy fell. Liam watched in horror as the boy's figure was swallowed by the river below, his body vanishing into the dark, swirling depths. The sound of the rushing water grew louder, almost deafening, and Liam stumbled backward, the world spinning around him. He woke with a start, his heart hammering in his chest. The room was dark, the only light coming from the faint glow of the moon through the curtains. For a moment, he couldn't breathe, his mind reeling from the dream. The boy had fallen. Liam sat up, trying to steady his racing thoughts. He could still feel the boy's presence, lingering in the corners of his mind like a shadow he couldn't shake. The dream had felt too real, too much like a memory. Had he known the boy from his childhood? Rising from his bed, Liam paced the room, his eyes drawn to the painting. The boy's eyes stared back at him from the canvas, dark and intense, as if they held the answers to the questions swirling in his mind. He needed to know the truth. Grabbing his phone, Liam searched for any information about the bridge and its history. He found old articles about accidents and strange disappearances near the area, but nothing specific about a boy. Nothing that could explain the connection he felt. But one thing was clear. Something had happened on that bridge, something tied to his past, and the boy was at the center of it. Liam's hand hovered over his phone screen, his thumb poised to press the call button. He hadn't spoken to his sister in weeks, not since their last argument, but now he needed answers. If anyone could help him make sense of these strange memories and dreams, it was Marissa. He hesitated. They hadn't exactly left things on good terms. Marissa had always been the more grounded of the two, practical to a fault, and she didn't have much patience for what she considered Liam's flights of fancy. But this wasn't a flight of fancy. This felt real, too real. Taking a deep breath, Liam pressed the button and listened to the ringing. "Liam?" Marissa's voice was hesitant when she finally answered, as if she wasn't sure why he was calling. "Hey, Marissa. I need to ask you something. It's important." There was a long pause on the other end of the line. "What's going on?" Liam could hear the tension in her voice, the unspoken words that hung between them like a thick fog. He knew Marissa didn't like talking about the past, especially their childhood, but he didn't have a choice. "It's about the bridge," he said, cutting straight to the point. Silence. "Marissa?" He could almost hear her shifting uncomfortably on the other end of the line. "Why are you bringing that up now?" Liam's heart raced. She knew something she wasn't telling him. "I've been having these dreams, memories, I think. There's a boy, and I'm starting to remember things from when we were kids." "Liam, stop." Marissa's voice was sharp, the tension in her words unmistakable. "You shouldn't be digging into this. We buried it for a reason." "What reason? What aren't you telling me?" Liam's frustration bubbled to the surface. He needed to know the truth. Marissa sighed, and for a moment, Liam thought she might hang up, but then she spoke, her voice quieter now, almost fragile. "It's not something you want to remember." Liam's grip tightened on the phone. "Marissa, I have to know. Please." Another long silence. Then, in a voice so soft he almost didn't hear it, she said, "It was an accident. We were kids, Liam. You don't need to drag all of that up again." "What do you mean, an accident?" Marissa didn't answer right away. "I can't talk about this. Not now. Just leave it alone." And with that, the call ended. Liam stared at the phone, his mind spinning with more questions than answers. What accident? What had happened on that bridge all those years ago? He set the phone down and looked at the painting once more. The boy's eyes seemed darker now, more knowing, as if he was waiting for Liam to uncover the truth. Whatever Marissa was hiding, Liam knew he couldn't let it go. He needed to dig deeper, to find out what had really happened on that bridge, and why it was haunting him now. The unease gnawed at Liam long after the call with Marissa. Her refusal to discuss what had happened when they were children only fueled his growing obsession. The boy in his dreams, the cryptic hints Marissa had dropped about an accident. It was all connected, but he couldn't see the full picture yet. Determined, he returned to the bridge the next evening, hoping that standing there would jog his memory. As the fog began to creep across the water, Liam found himself in the same spot where he'd first seen the boy. The damp air clung to his skin, and the creaking of the wooden planks beneath his feet filled the silence. He stared down into the dark river, the rush of water mirroring the whirlwind in his mind. A fleeting image flashed before his eyes. The boy from his dream, balancing precariously on the bridge railing. In the vision, Liam saw himself as a child, standing nearby, frozen in fear. And then, the boy fell, just like in his dream. The memory was faint, blurred around the edges like an old photograph, but it was there. His heart pounded in his chest, and he instinctively stepped back from the edge of the bridge, his hands trembling. Why couldn't he remember more? Liam sat on one of the stone benches at the edge of the bridge, the cold seeping through his coat. He closed his eyes, trying to concentrate, to pull the memories out from wherever they were buried. And then, another fragment. Laughter. The sound of children playing. His own voice, and another, familiar, but distant. They were running across the bridge, racing each other. But there was something wrong, something dangerous about their game. The laughter stopped abruptly, replaced by the sound of a scream. The memory vanished, leaving Liam shaken and breathless. He knew now that this wasn't just a nightmare or a coincidence. Something had happened on that bridge, and it involved the boy from his dreams. But why couldn't he remember all of it? And why did Marissa seem so afraid to talk about it? Liam stood and looked back at the bridge one last time. The fog was thicker now, curling around the wooden beams like tendrils of smoke. The boy's face lingered in his thoughts, his dark eyes filled with something Liam couldn't quite decipher. Fear? Sorrow? Guilt? He wasn't sure, but one thing was becoming clearer by the day. If he didn't uncover the truth, these memories would haunt him forever. Liam's mind raced as he sat in the local library, poring over old town records. He had combed through every article, every public file he could find, but there was nothing specific about the bridge. No reports of accidents or deaths that matched the memory of the boy. Then, tucked away in an old newspaper archive, he found something. It was a short article dated over 20 years ago about a local child who had gone missing near the bridge. The child's name was Michael, and he was last seen playing near the river with friends. The article mentioned that no body was ever found, and the case had gone cold. The authorities had ruled it an accident, but whispers around town spoke of something more sinister. Liam's heart raced as he scanned the rest of the article, his eyes locking on the names of the friends who had been with Michael that day. One of them was Marissa. Liam's stomach churned. His sister had been there. She had witnessed whatever happened, yet she had never spoken about it, not once in all these years. He read on, learning that Michael had been an only child, his disappearance leaving his parents devastated. They had moved away shortly after the incident, unable to cope with the loss. As Liam sat back in his chair, a wave of nausea washed over him. Michael. The name felt familiar now, as if it had always been lingering just out of reach in the back of his mind. He could almost hear the boy's voice, echoing through the years. Could Michael be the boy from the bridge? The one who had vanished from his dreams and memories alike? Liam's thoughts were interrupted by the sharp sound of his phone vibrating on the desk beside him. He picked it up, seeing Marissa's name on the screen. For a moment, he considered letting it ring, but something inside him told him to answer. "Liam, I need to talk to you." Marissa's voice was tense, urgent. "Something's happened." "What is it?" "There's been another disappearance. A boy. Near the bridge." Liam's blood ran cold. "I saw it on the news," she continued, her voice wavering. "They're saying it's just like what happened with Michael. The same spot, Liam. The same place where she stopped herself, her breath shaking on the other end of the line. Liam's mind raced. Another boy, vanishing in the same place where Michael had disappeared all those years ago. This couldn't be a coincidence. He grabbed his coat, already heading for the door. "Liam, where are you going?" Marissa's voice was panicked, but he barely heard her. "I need to see it for myself," he said, his voice grim. "I'll call you later." He hung up before she could protest and hurried out the door, his heart pounding in his chest. The street seemed unnaturally quiet as he made his way back to the bridge, the fog creeping in like an unwelcome visitor. The news of another disappearance only deepened the sense of dread that had been building within him. When he arrived, the bridge looked exactly as it had before, as though time had stood still. The fog clung to the air, and the water rushed below in its endless, relentless flow. But something felt different this time. There was a heaviness, a weight that pressed down on him as he approached the railing where he had last seen the boy. He stood there for what felt like hours, his mind swirling with questions. Why had Michael's disappearance been forgotten? And why was history repeating itself now? As Liam stared out over the water, he felt a presence beside him. He turned, half expecting to see the boy again. But there was no one there. Only the fog and the sound of the river below. Liam's mind buzzed with questions as he made his way to Marissa's house. After the discovery of Michael's disappearance and the recent vanishing of another boy, he knew it was time to confront her. She had been there, that day, when Michael disappeared. She had to know more than she was letting on. Marissa's house sat at the end of a quiet street, its tidy exterior a stark contrast to the chaos that was swirling in Liam's mind. He stood at her front door, hesitating for just a moment before knocking. It wasn't long before Marissa opened the door, her face pale, her expression a mix of surprise and anxiety. "Liam," she said, stepping aside to let him in. "I didn't expect you to come over so soon." "I couldn't wait," Liam replied, walking into her living room. The air inside felt thick, heavy with unspoken words. "We need to talk about Michael." Marissa stiffened, her eyes narrowing. "Liam, I told you. It's better if we don't." "I found an article," Liam interrupted, his voice sharper than he intended. "An article from when he disappeared. You were with him that day, Marissa. Why didn't you tell me?" Marissa's face drained of color, and she sat down on the edge of the couch, her hands gripping her knees. She looked away, avoiding his gaze. "Because I didn't want you to remember. You were just a kid, Liam. It wasn't your fault." Liam's heart pounded in his chest. "What wasn't my fault? What happened that day?" For a moment, Marissa didn't respond. She stared out the window, her expression tight with emotion. "It was an accident," she finally said, her voice barely above a whisper. "You and Michael were playing on the bridge. I wasn't paying attention. You were both just running around like kids do. And then," she paused, her breath catching in her throat, "Michael fell. He slipped on one of the wet planks and fell into the river." Liam felt the ground shift beneath him. His legs felt weak, and he sat down across from her, trying to process what she was saying. The memory, still blurry and fragmented, flashed in his mind. Michael, balancing on the edge of the bridge. The scream, the sound of rushing water. "I tried to get him," Marissa continued, tears welling in her eyes. "But by the time I got to the edge, he was gone. The current, it was too strong. I didn't know what to do. I was scared. We both were. So we ran. We didn't tell anyone because we were afraid. And then, when no one found him, they just assumed he got lost in the woods." Liam's hands clenched into fists. His mind raced, trying to reconcile this truth with the memories that had been haunting him. He had been there. He had seen it happen, but his young mind had buried it so deep that it had only surfaced now, all these years later. "Why didn't you tell anyone?" he asked, his voice shaking. "Why didn't you tell me?" Marissa wiped her eyes and shook her head. "I didn't want you to carry that guilt, Liam. You were just a kid. It wasn't your fault. It wasn't anyone's fault. It was just an accident. An accident." The word felt hollow in his mouth. Liam stood up, his body tense with emotion. He had spent years trying to make sense of his life, his art, his fractured memories. And now, it all came back to that one moment on the bridge. "What about the other boy?" Liam asked, his voice quieter now. "The one who disappeared recently. Do you think it's connected?" Marissa's face darkened. "I don't know, but I've been thinking about it too. It's too similar, Liam, and I can't shake the feeling that there's something more. Something we don't understand." Liam stared at her, his mind buzzing with possibilities. What if Michael's disappearance had left something behind? Something that had been waiting, lurking in the fog, for another opportunity? "We need to go back to the bridge," Liam said, the words slipping out before he could think. "We need to face whatever's out there." Marissa looked up at him, her face filled with fear. "Liam, no. We can't." "We have to," he replied, his voice firm. "It's the only way." The next evening, with the weight of their shared guilt pressing down on them, Liam and Marissa made their way back to the bridge. The air was thick with mist, curling around the trees like spectral fingers as the night settled in around them. The only sound was the soft rustling of leaves in the wind and the distant rush of the river below. Liam led the way, his flashlight cutting through the fog, but the light felt weak, almost swallowed by the oppressive darkness that surrounded them. Marissa walked a few steps behind, her face pale and her movements hesitant. The bridge loomed before them, just as it had in his memories, the old wooden beams creaking under their weight as they stepped onto it. The familiar scent of damp wood and moss filled the air, pulling at long-buried memories. Liam stopped at the spot where Michael had fallen, staring down at the swirling waters below. His heart pounded in his chest as he tried to imagine that day, to fill in the missing pieces of the memory. But something felt wrong. The air around them was too still, too quiet, as if the world was holding its breath. "Do you feel that?" Marissa whispered, stepping closer to Liam. It's like something's watching us." Liam nodded, his throat tight. He could feel it too, the weight of unseen eyes, the cold prickle on the back of his neck. The same feeling he'd had when he first saw the boy on the bridge. They stood there in silence for several long moments, the fog thickening around them, until a sudden noise shattered the stillness. It was a faint, rhythmic creaking, the sound of wood bending under weight. Liam turned, his flashlight sweeping across the bridge. At the far end, barely visible through the fog, a figure stood on the railing. A boy. His heart stopped. For a moment, it felt like the world tilted, the past and present blurring together. The boy balanced on the edge, his thin frame teetering over the water, just as Michael had all those years ago. "Michael?" Liam whispered, his voice barely audible. The boy didn't move, didn't turn to look at them. He just stood there, his back to them, as if waiting for something. Liam's hand tightened around the flashlight, his mind racing. Was this the boy from his dreams? Or was this something else? Before he could take a step closer, the boy jumped. Liam lunged forward, his heart pounding in his chest as he ran toward the spot where the boy had been. But when he reached the edge, there was nothing. No splash, no ripple in the water. Only the swirling mist and the dark current of the river below. "Liam." Marissa's voice was sharp with fear. "What's happening?" "I don't know," Liam whispered, his hands trembling as he looked down at the river. His thoughts spun in chaotic circles. The image of the boy burned into his mind. Was it Michael? Was it a ghost? Or was it something far darker? Before they could process what had just happened, a sound echoed through the fog, a soft, whispering voice carried on the wind. "Liam." It was faint, barely more than a breath, but it was unmistakable. Liam's blood ran cold. Liam barely slept that night. The boy's disappearance from the bridge had shaken him to his core, and the faint whisper of his name still echoed in his mind. Was it Michael's voice? Or something else entirely? The line between reality and memory was blurring, and Liam felt as though he was losing his grip on both. He sat in his studio the next morning, staring at the painting of the boy on the bridge. His dark eyes seemed even more haunting now, as if they were trying to tell him something. Something Liam wasn't ready to hear. The brush strokes were raw and erratic, the boy's face more detailed than any other part of the painting. It felt alive, as though it might step out of the canvas at any moment. Liam's hands shook as he picked up his paintbrush, but he couldn't bring himself to continue. Each stroke felt heavier, like the weight of the past was pressing down on him, suffocating him with memories he didn't want to remember. His phone buzzed on the table, startling him. Marissa. He stared at the screen, hesitating before answering. He didn't want to talk, not after last night, but something inside him, perhaps the lingering fear, compelled him to pick up the call. Liam. Marissa's voice sounded strained, frayed around the edges. Are you okay? Liam pressed a hand to his temple, trying to block out the throbbing headache that had settled behind his eyes. No, he admitted. I'm not. I've been thinking, she said, her voice quieter now. Maybe we shouldn't have gone back there. Whatever happened, whatever we saw, it's not something we can fix. It's too late. Liam's grip tightened on the phone. Too late for what? Michael's dead, Marissa. He's been dead for years. But something's happening now. Something that has to do with him. We can't just ignore it. I know, she whispered. But Liam, I'm scared. I'm scared of what this is doing to you. You're not the same. I'm not the same because I'm remembering things I buried for years, Liam said, his frustration boiling over. Things you didn't want me to remember. But I can't ignore it anymore, Marissa. I need to understand. There was a long silence on the other end of the line, and for a moment, Liam thought she might hang up. But then her voice came through, softer, almost resigned. What are you going to do? I'm going back, Liam said, his voice steady, despite the fear gnawing at his insides. I'm going back to the bridge, and I'm going to find out what's really happening. That night, Liam found himself standing at the bridge once more, the familiar mist swirling around his feet. The river's rushing sound had become a constant background noise in his life, like a haunting melody he couldn't escape. But this time, something felt different. The air was heavier, oppressive, as if the very atmosphere around the bridge had thickened, pressing down on him. Every step Liam took across the wooden planks felt like an act of defiance against whatever force was lingering there. He reached the spot where the boy had jumped the night before, his breath catching in his throat. The water below churned in its endless current, but the air was silent. No whisper of his name, no shadowy figure standing on the railing, just the fog and the bridge, as still as death. But Liam knew better now. He knew something was there, lurking just beneath the surface, waiting for him to uncover it. He stepped closer to the edge, staring down at the river. Michael. His voice barely broke the silence, but he felt the ripple in the air as if something had heard him. The whisper returned, faint but unmistakable. Liam. Liam's heart pounded in his chest, his hands shaking as he gripped the railing. He leaned forward, his eyes scanning the darkness below, searching for any sign of movement. But there was nothing. No figure. No splash. Only the whisper of his name, carried on the wind. What do you want from me? Liam shouted, his voice breaking. What am I supposed to do? The whisper grew louder, surrounding him. Remember. And then, as suddenly as it had come, the voice was gone. Liam's knees buckled, and he sank to the ground, gasping for breath. The weight of the memories, the guilt, the fear. It was all too much. He pressed his hands to his face, trying to hold himself together, but the images flooded his mind faster than he could push them away. Michael, the bridge, the fall, and then something else. A hand, reaching out. Liam's hand. He had tried to save him. He had tried to grab Michael's arm before he fell, but he had been too late. The realization hit him like a punch to the gut. He hadn't just witnessed Michael's fall. He had been part of it, and the guilt, the unbearable guilt, had consumed him. The memory was so vivid now, so clear, It left him gasping for air. He had blocked it out, buried it deep, and now it was clawing its way back to the surface, demanding to be acknowledged. Liam pulled himself to his feet, his body trembling with the weight of the revelation. He had to leave. He had to get away from the bridge, from the memories, from the whispering voice that wouldn't let him go. But as he turned to leave, a figure appeared in the fog. The boy. Liam froze, his heart hammering in his chest. The boy stood at the far end of the bridge, his dark eyes staring directly at Liam. He was exactly as he had been in the painting, his face pale and his expression unreadable. "Michael," Liam whispered, his voice shaking. The boy said nothing, only stared, as if waiting. And then, just as before, the boy turned and disappeared into the mist. Liam stood there for a long moment, his mind spinning, his body frozen in place. The boy was gone, but the memories, the guilt, they remained. Liam couldn't shake the image of the boy from his mind. After his breakdown on the bridge, he had gone home, exhausted and terrified. But the boy's presence lingered in his thoughts, his dark eyes watching him even as he tried to rest. There was something he was missing, something the boy was trying to tell him. The next morning, Liam found himself once again in front of his easel, the unfinished painting of the boy staring back at him. But this time, instead of fear, he felt determination. He couldn't run from this anymore. He needed to confront the boy, to face whatever truth lay buried in his memories. He picked up his brush, his hand moving with purpose as he added the final details to the painting. The boy's eyes became clearer, his face sharper, more real. The fog in the background swirled around him, framing the image like a dream. But the boy was solid, undeniable. When he was done, Liam stepped back and stared at the finished painting. The boy's gaze was so intense, so piercing, that it felt like he was looking straight into Liam's soul. For a moment, the room was silent, save for the faint sound of Liam's breathing. And then, the whisper returned. "Liam." The voice was clearer now, more distinct, and Liam felt a chill run down his spine. He turned slowly, half expecting to see the boy standing in the room with him. But there was no one there. "Who are you?" Liam whispered, his eyes scanning the empty room. The whisper echoed again, softer this time. "Remember." Liam closed his eyes, the weight of the words settling over him like a heavy blanket. He had to go back. He had to face the boy again. Liam returned to the bridge that evening, the familiar fog already swirling around the wooden planks as he approached. He knew the boy would be there. He could feel it deep in his bones, as if the child's presence was etched into the very fabric of the place. This time, he didn't hesitate. He walked straight to the middle of the bridge, his heart pounding in his chest. The river rushed below him, its steady flow a constant reminder of the past. But Liam's focus was on the boy. And there he was. The boy stood at the far end of the bridge, his figure barely visible through the mist. But he was real as the bridge itself, and Liam knew he couldn't run from him anymore. "Michael," Liam called out, his voice steady despite the fear gnawing at his insides. "I'm here. I'm ready." The boy turned, his dark eyes locking onto Liam's. And then, for the first time, the boy spoke. "You let me fall." Liam stood frozen on the bridge, the boy's words echoing in his mind. "You let me fall." His heart raced, the air around him growing colder with each passing second. The fog seemed to close in, thickening, pressing down on him as the weight of the truth began to surface. Michael's dark eyes bore into him, filled not with anger, but with something far more powerful, sorrow. Deep, aching sorrow. I didn't mean to," Liam stammered, his voice cracking. The boy's presence brought a wave of nausea over him, his memories now forcing their way through the barriers he had placed around them for so many years. And then the full memory hit him like a flood. He was back on the bridge, but this time it wasn't a dream. It was real, vivid, as if he had been pulled straight into his own past. He saw himself as a child, running across the wooden planks, laughing with Michael. The sun was bright that day, casting long shadows across the bridge, and the sound of the river below was nothing more than background noise to their innocent game. Liam felt the joy of being young, carefree, but underneath it, there was a sense of something darker, something they didn't understand. The memory continued, and Liam saw Michael run ahead, balancing on the narrow railing, challenging Liam to do the same. His heart pounded in his chest, a faint echo of the fear he had felt that day. But he had followed Michael anyway, trying to prove he wasn't scared. And then it happened. Michael slipped. The world seemed to slow as Liam watched the scene unfold, helpless to change the course of events. Michael's foot lost its grip on the slick wood, and he fell backward, his hands flailing for something, anything, to hold on to. Liam reached out, his fingers brushing against Michael's hand. But it was too late. The current of the river swept Michael away in an instant, his small body disappearing beneath the dark water. Liam stood frozen on the bridge, his hands still outstretched. He had failed. He had let Michael fall. The memory faded, and Liam was back in the present, standing on the same bridge where it had all happened. His body trembled with the weight of the realization, his breath coming in short, ragged gasps. Michael had fallen because of him. He had been too slow, too weak to save him. The guilt that had been buried for so many years now rushed to the surface, overwhelming him. "I tried," Liam whispered, his voice barely audible. "I tried to save you." Michael stood before him, his expression unchanged. "You let me fall," he repeated. But there was no accusation in his voice, only the quiet, haunting truth. Liam dropped to his knees, the weight of his grief too much to bear. Tears streamed down his face as the years of guilt and shame poured out of him, mingling with the cold mist that surrounded him. "I'm sorry," he sobbed. "I'm so sorry." The boy didn't move, his figure standing still and silent in the fog. Liam felt the world spinning around him, his vision blurring as the full scope of what had happened consumed him. He had let Michael fall. He had lived with that guilt for decades, hiding it from himself, from Marissa, from the world. But now it was out. Now he had remembered everything. As the tears continued to fall, Liam felt something shift. The weight on his chest began to lift, ever so slightly, as if the act of remembering had begun to free him from the burden he had carried for so long. Michael's figure started to fade, the mist swirling around him until he was little more than a shadow. But before he disappeared completely, Liam heard his voice one last time. "It wasn't your fault." And then, he was gone. The walk back from the bridge felt surreal. The fog clung to Liam like a shroud, but something inside him had changed. The heaviness, though still present, no longer crushed him as it once had. Michael's final words echoed in his mind. "It wasn't your fault." The sentence reverberated through him, offering a sliver of solace in the storm of his emotions. He returned to his apartment, where the painting of Michael awaited him, dark and haunting. But now, when he looked at it, it no longer held the same grip on his soul. The boy's eyes, once accusatory and filled with mystery, now seemed at peace. Liam could finally see it. Michael wasn't blaming him. The boy wasn't haunting him out of malice or anger. He had simply wanted Liam to remember, to confront the truth they had both buried. Liam set the painting aside, covering it with a cloth. He couldn't destroy it. It was a part of him now, but it didn't need to be displayed anymore. It had served its purpose. He had faced the truth, and in doing so, had begun the process of letting go. The next morning, he called Marissa. She answered on the second ring, her voice tense with anticipation. "Liam?" "I went back," he said, his voice steady. "I remembered everything." There was a long pause on the other end of the line. Liam could hear Marissa's breath catch as she processed his words. What did you remember?" she finally asked, her voice trembling. Liam closed his eyes, the memory of the previous night still fresh in his mind. "I remembered the day Michael fell. I remembered running with him, playing on the bridge, and I remembered him slipping. I tried to catch him, but I was too late." A shaky breath escaped Marissa, and Liam could feel the weight of her own guilt pressing through the phone. "I should have been watching you both," she whispered. "I was older. I should have stopped it. I was terrified. I didn't know what to do." "We were just kids, Marissa," Liam said gently. "We couldn't have known what would happen." There was silence again, but this time, it was a different kind of silence, a shared understanding, a release of some of the tension that had weighed them both down for so long. "I saw him last night," Liam continued, his voice softer now. On the bridge. Michael was there? Or something like him. I don't know if it was a ghost, a memory, or something else, but I talked to him. He told me. Liam paused, feeling the emotion well up inside him once again. He told me it wasn't my fault. Marissa's breath hitched on the other end of the line, and for a moment, neither of them spoke. When she finally did, her voice was thick with tears. Do you believe him? Liam stared at the floor, the echoes of Michael's words still lingering in his mind. I think I do. There was another pause, longer this time, before Marissa spoke again. Maybe we can finally move on, she said quietly. Maybe we can stop running from it. Liam nodded, even though she couldn't see him. Yeah, he said softly. Maybe we can. They sat in silence for a few more moments, the shared weight of their childhood memories hanging between them. But this time, the silence wasn't painful. It wasn't filled with the tension and fear that had haunted them for so many years. It was a silence of understanding, of acceptance. I'm glad you called, Marissa said finally, her voice steadier now. I'm glad we're talking about this. Me too, Liam replied. I think it's time we stop pretending it never happened. They exchanged a few more words, gentle, tentative, before saying their goodbyes. As Liam hung up the phone, he felt a sense of relief that he hadn't experienced in years. It wasn't complete closure, not yet, but it was a start. He had faced the past, confronted the truth, and shared that truth with his sister. For the first time in a long time, he felt like he was finally moving forward. Liam walked over to his studio, where the painting of Michael still lay under the cloth. He hesitated for a moment, then carefully uncovered it, looking at the boy's face once more. The dark eyes that had once seemed so menacing now felt different, softer, more familiar. Liam didn't feel the same fear or guilt he once had. Instead, he felt a quiet understanding. He carefully propped the painting against the wall, a symbol of everything he had uncovered. The fog was lifting, both from the bridge and from his mind. He wasn't entirely free of the past, but the weight had lightened. He had begun to understand that facing his memories, facing the truth, was the only way forward. Liam took a deep breath, then turned toward the window, watching as the morning light filtered in. The world outside was still, the mist gradually rising as the sun broke through the clouds. And for the first time in years, Liam felt like he could breathe. A week passed, and the weight of the past began to lift from Liam's shoulders. The fog that had once clouded his mind was slowly dissipating, allowing him to breathe more freely than he had in years. The nightmares that had plagued him were gone, replaced by quiet, dreamless nights. But there was still one thing left unfinished, the painting of Michael. Liam stood in front of the canvas, his fingers lightly grazing the surface. He had come so far, confronting the memories, facing the boy who had haunted him for so long. But something about the painting still felt incomplete. It was as though there was one final stroke, one last detail that needed to be added before he could truly let go. He stared at Michael's face, those dark eyes that had once filled him with fear. Now, they felt different. The boy wasn't accusing him. He wasn't asking for something Liam couldn't give. Instead, there was a quiet understanding in his expression, a piece that had been missing all these years. Liam dipped his brush into a soft shade of gray, his hand moving with a newfound sense of purpose. He added a touch of light to the fog in the background, a subtle shift in tone that seemed to brighten the entire painting. As the fog lifted on the canvas, so too did the heaviness in Liam's heart. With each stroke, the scene before him transformed. The darkness that had once shrouded the boy began to fade, and in its place, there was a sense of warmth, of closure. The painting was no longer about guilt or fear. It was about memory, about honoring what had been lost, but also about letting go. Liam stepped back, studying his work. The bridge in the painting looked more peaceful now, the fog lifting to reveal the soft light of dawn breaking through. Michael stood at the center, his figure no longer blurred by shadows, but clear and distinct. For the first time in years, the painting felt complete. Liam set down his brush, his fingers trembling slightly as he let out a long, slow breath. He had spent so much time haunted by this image, by the boy who had disappeared, by the memories he had buried. But now, looking at the finished painting, he felt a sense of peace he hadn't thought possible. It was over. He had done what he needed to do. He had faced the truth, and now he could finally move forward. Later that day, Liam decided to visit Marissa. He hadn't seen her since their phone call a week earlier, but something inside him told him it was time. Time to share the last piece of the journey they had both been on for so long. When he arrived at her house, Marissa greeted him with a tentative smile. There was still a shadow of guilt in her eyes, but Liam could see that she, too, had begun to heal. "I brought something," Liam said, holding the painting carefully in his hands. Marissa's eyes widened as he unveiled the canvas. Her breath caught in her throat, and she took a step closer, her gaze fixed on Michael's face. For a long moment, she said nothing, simply staring at the painting in silence. Finally, she looked up at Liam, tears welling in her eyes. "It's beautiful," she whispered, her voice filled with emotion. Liam nodded, feeling a lump rise in his throat. "I thought it was time to finish it." Marissa wiped away a tear, her expression softening as she took a deep breath. "It feels like closure," she said, her voice shaky but steady. "Like we can finally move on." Liam smiled faintly, his heart lighter than it had been in years. "Yeah," he agreed. "I think we can." They stood there together, side by side, staring at the painting that had once been a symbol of so much pain. Now, it was a reminder of the past, yes, but also of the strength it had taken to face it. After a few moments, Marissa turned to him, her eyes filled with gratitude. "Thank you, Liam, for finishing this. For everything." Liam felt a surge of emotion rise in his chest, but he pushed it down, managing a soft smile. "We both needed it," he said simply. They spent the rest of the afternoon talking, not about Michael, not about the past, but about life, about how things had changed, how they had both grown, and how they could finally look forward to the future. Weeks later, Liam stood in his studio, the morning light filtering through the windows as he prepared for a new project. The room, once filled with the weight of unfinished paintings and unresolved memories, now felt open, airy, like a blank canvas waiting for a new story to be told. Liam had cleared away the old works, the ones that had haunted him for so long, and made room for something fresh, something different. He felt lighter, freer, and for the first time in years, he was excited to create again. The painting of Michael hung on the wall, but now it wasn't a source of pain or guilt. It was a reminder of everything Liam had overcome, of the journey he had taken to confront his past and find peace. It was a symbol of closure, of letting go, and of the new beginnings that lay ahead. As he picked up his brush, Liam felt a sense of anticipation building inside him. The new painting wasn't about Michael or the bridge or anything from his past. It was something entirely different, something that came from a place of hope, of renewal. He dipped his brush into a vibrant shade of blue, the color rich and full of life, and began to paint. Each stroke felt like a new beginning, a fresh start. The image that took shape on the canvas was bright, full of light and movement, a far cry from the dark, shadowy figures that had once filled his work. As he painted, Liam realized that this was what he had been searching for all along. Not just closure, but a sense of freedom. The freedom to create without the weight of the past dragging him down. The freedom to look forward, to embrace the possibilities of the future. When the painting was finished, Liam stepped back, a smile spreading across his face. It wasn't perfect, it wasn't supposed to be, but it was full of life, full of hope. And for the first time in years, Liam felt like he was too. Later that evening, Liam decided to take a walk by the river. The sun was setting, casting a warm glow over the water, and the air was crisp and fresh. As he crossed the bridge, he paused for a moment, looking out over the river that had once been the site of so much pain. But now, it felt different, peaceful, like the past had finally released its hold on him. Liam smiled to himself as he continued walking, his mind clear and his heart light. He didn't know what the future held, but for the first time, he was ready to embrace it. The fog had lifted, the boy was gone, and Liam was free. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and hit that notification bell so you never miss a new upload. Please leave a like if this story had an impact on you, and let us know in the comments what part of the story you found most powerful or emotional. Your feedback means a lot to us. We'd also love to hear from you. Leave a comment with suggestions for stories you'd like to see next. Whether it's mystery, drama, or something else entirely, we're always open to your ideas. Thanks for your support, and we can't wait to create more stories together.